Over the last couple of months, perhaps even longer, you will have undoubtedly heard the mainstream media say that Palestine-Israel issue is a very, very complex and complicated issue that dates back thousands of years, and that's why achieving peace in the Middle East is almost impossible.
It sounds like there are just two sides, but in reality, it's way more.
None may have as complicated a history as the Middle East.
Read about Israel and about the conflict with the Palestinians. There's a word that comes up all the time, and it is complexity.
Conflict is complex.
Well, it could not be further from the truth. It is an utter and a total lie. It's a very simple case of occupying people's land very, very illegally and by carrying out multiple genocides. So let's examine the historical facts. We know about the crucifixion story. It is, after all, in Christian scriptures. And there is no arguing about who the villain of the story is. And for the Christians, the villain is the Jewish people. It was them who tried to crucify and kill the most important religious figure for the Christians. They claim that he was the only son of God and the Jewish people killed him. So they were not going to be happy about it, right? In fact, in 70 AD, King Titus, Roman Catholic king, invaded Jerusalem, killed many Jewish people. And what followed for the next 2,000 years was more of the same, really. Jewish people that were living in Europe were living in terrible conditions at the hands of European Christians. This is not an opinion. This is not feelings or sentiments. This is historical facts. Europeans were so upset with the Jewish people that they coined this term, the Jewish problem. Look up Spanish Inquisition. The Catholic monarch clearly said that Jewish people are gaining population and that spells trouble for us. So we got to nip it in the bud. But by the way, do you know who came to the rescue of the Jewish people in the 15th century when the Spanish Inquisition took place? It was the Muslims, the Ottoman Empire. They sent boats for the Jewish people to escape. So the conflict was never between Muslims and Jewish people. It was actually Europeans and Jewish people. In Europe, for the last God knows how many centuries, Jewish people were persecuted. I mean, they were treated horribly. Look up pogroms, but do it at your own peril because the stuff you will find in there is not for the weak-hearted. They did not let the Jewish people have any jobs. They did not let them mingle. Of course, you couldn't think about marrying anyone. In fact, they were not even allowed to live in the same areas. They had these completely dilapidated corners of the cities that were not at all pleasant, called ghettos. That's where the Jewish people in Europe used to live. But while the Jewish people were not allowed to participate in many professions, the one thing that they could do among themselves was interest-based lending and usury. So the Jewish people were doing that, and they were slowly but surely amassing a little bit of wealth. Then enters this rich Austrian journalist writer fella of Jewish descent, but he was a renowned atheist called Theodor Herzl. Ironically, Theodor means gift from God. And this guy, he's looking at Europe and he's like, this is no way to live for Jewish people. We need to have a place of our own. So he proposes Argentina. I bet not many people knew that. Yes, Argentina, because it was remote, not easily accessible, but the religious Jewish people, they were absolutely and vehemently opposed to that idea because according to their religious scriptures, they are awaiting the Messiah, which is their religious prophecy, which I'd rather not get into. But until that Messiah comes, they're not to have their own land.
Judaism is subservience to God. That's what it's all about. It's a religion of 3,000 years, while Zionism is a mere 150 years. It's a political movement. It's a materialistic movement. It was started by Jews who are non-religious, and they're simply incorporating, using the name Israel, using the Star of David, and claiming that it's given to them by God. And we who are following the Torah, who are true to the Torah, stand up adamantly refuting what they're saying. And the whole concept is strange, is totally antithetical to our teachings, contradictory.
Our general point that Jews are not Zionists and Zionists are not Jews. The Zionist state does not represent Torah through Jews. Its existence is against the Torah, against Jewish law.
At the same time, the Ottoman Empire, which spanned Palestine and Hijaz, modern Saudi, and many other areas, there were Jewish people in thousands living under the Ottoman Empire, and they were living completely peacefully, and it was a stark contrast to the lives the Jewish people had in Europe. And they would urge their relatives and friends to migrate, and those who were able to, they did. And Christians and the Jewish people and the Muslims coexisting very peacefully, and not just coexisting, but celebrating one another.
Filming at Jerusalem Station provide the first moving pictures taken in Palestine. By the end of the 19th century, Palestine has 500,000 inhabitants, of whom 30,000 live in Jerusalem. A veiled woman, a Sunni Muslim, one of the majority. an Orthodox Jew. He too turns away from the camera. Here we have an Armenian pope. The holy places of the three religions are scattered across a few hundred square meters. The great mosque is close to Christ's tomb. Further along, at the foot of the Wailing Wall, a Jew is reciting a prayer. He is wearing a Turkish tabush, and though he prays in Hebrew, his everyday language is Arabic. Jews form half the population of Jerusalem, but in the country as a whole, they make up less than 5% of the total. Christians account for 10% and Muslims 85%.
So I ask, well, where is the 2,000-year issue? Because if you're talking about the rightful claim to the land, if that's what we're talking about in this modern world, then does it mean that the Aborigines have a rightful claim over Australia? Or what about rightful claim to the Americas? And if that's the logic, then should we expel all the white folks from South Africa? After all, it's Africa, for crying out loud. No, we don't do that because we're not living in 1000 AD. Folks, this is not brand new information. The conflict that does exist is between Palestinians/Arabs/Muslims and the Israelis. Let's see when this conflict started. We're talking about the late 19th century. Palestine was under the Ottoman rule, the Muslim Caliphate, and the Caliph at that time was Sultan Hamid II. Now, Theodor Herzl sent two of his friends who had friendly dealings with Sultan in 1896 with the proposition that Herzl would like to get a piece of land here in Jerusalem where the Jewish people could settle down, and so this land will be for the Jewish people with complete autonomy. And Sultan furiously and vehemently declined, and in fact he said that, as you are my friends, if you are his friends in the same way, tell Theodor never to bring this up again, because this is not my land. This is the land of the people. So they go back, and Theodor bides his time, at the same time publishing pamphlets and distributing them across Europe for this new movement that he created, Zionism. Yes, it was created less than 150 years ago, and they're trying to push this narrative that it is anti-Semitic to be anti-Zionist.
That anti-Zionism is the new anti-Semitism.
Actually, the locus classicus, the best formulation of this, was by an ambassador to the United Nations, Abba Eban, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, in an article that he wrote about 45 years ago, which I urge you to read, which appeared in an American Jewish journal, Congress Weekly. He wrote an interesting article in which he was then UN ambassador from the State of Israel. He advised the American Jewish community that they had two tasks to perform. One task was to show that criticism of the policy, what he called anti-Zionism, that means actually criticisms of the policy of the State of Israel, were anti-Semitism. That's the first task. Second task, if the criticism was made by Jews, their task was to show that it's neurotic self-hatred, needs psychiatric treatment. And he gave two examples of latter category. One was I.F. Stone, the other was me. So we have to be treated for our psychiatric disorders, and non-Jews have to be condemned for anti-Semitism if they're critical of the State of Israel. There is no sensible charge. No sensible charge. There's nothing to respond to. It's not a form of anti-Semitism. It's simply criticism of the criminal actions of a state, period.
So Theodor was publishing and distributing pamphlets trying to convince the more liberal Jewish people. He said, let's go to Palestine. That is our rightful land. So the religious Jewish families were vehemently opposing him as much as they could. But these people were living in utter suffrage, so they didn't have much of a voice. But what he had successfully done was he had brainwashed Jewish people. The Europeans were very happy about it. They could not get rid of the Jewish people fast enough. So fast forward to the 20th century. Theodor meets Sultan Hamid II for the first time. Now, the one thing you need to know about the Ottoman Empire at that time was they had a big empire. The empire, as I mentioned, spread across many a land, and to defend that land meant having to fight wars, and wars were expensive. So there was a debt that the Ottoman Empire was carrying, and that debt was administered through Ottoman Public Debt Administration, OPDA, through which that debt was managed. That debt in today's value was in excess of $11 billion. That was owned by the British and the Germans and the French and so on and so forth. So Theodor approached Sultan Hamid and offered to buy out 20% of that debt. That's like $2.5 billion. And Sultan was very receptive to it until Theodor brought up the old proposal again of getting a land for the Jewish people with complete autonomy within Palestine. And Sultanahmet again declined and said to never bring it up again. Then the World War I happened. The thing you need to know about the British Empire at that time, much like any other empire, they were in debt, they had fought many wars, and they needed the money. So when Theodore realized that he's not going to get what he's after from the Muslims, he decided to change allegiances, to ally himself with the British. And then came the Balfour Declaration. Balfour, he is writing letters to everyone, and he writes this famous Balfour Declaration to Rothschild, which was another family of Jewish descent with a lot of money. I mean, they were the richest people in the world. And at that time, British were promising everything to everyone. I mean, if you went to them with £100 and said, I want Denmark, they would say, yeah, we'll get you Denmark. Just give us the money. So the World War I wraps up, and the Ottoman Empire has to relinquish the control of Palestine. And the British were very, very happy about it because they could at least keep one or two of the promises. And because Rothschild was one of the biggest contributors, they really wanted to keep that promise. So that gravy train from Rothschild kept on coming. So from the end of World War I until World War II, they started migrating in droves. The European Jewish people who came with the idea of conquering the land, not a better life. Because there were two types of Jewish people migrating to Palestine at that time. One who were escaping persecution at the hands of Europeans, Hitler, so on and so forth, Eastern Europe. And then this other group, they had very sinister ideas. They wanted to occupy this land with the slogan, a land without people for a people without land. Now, it sounds very nice, but the problem is that there were people in that land, the Palestinians. Ask yourselves, why do you refer to them as Palestinians today? Is there a country in the world known as Palestine in your maps? We have all been complicit in eradicating one of the most beautiful and ancient cultures of the world, and some of us are paying for it. Where do you think your tax money is going? The people who have sinister ideas, they start causing squabbles and issues. And the next couple of decades were very tumultuous, illegally occupying land, so on and so forth. And then the World War II happened. And then in 1948, they declared themselves a free nation called Israel, and they completely eradicated the name Palestine from the map. The American president at that time, he was very quick to accept Israel. I believe it was Truman. And when the journalist asked him, why did you so quickly agree? Even many countries in Europe have not agreed and accepted Israel. And he said, well, I got to think about my vote bank of Jewish people that are living there. And there are no Muslims that vote for me, so it was an easy choice. It wasn't done because of some sacred duty. It was basic human greed for power and domination. It's not complicated at all. In 1948, they expelled close to 1 million Palestinian people from their own homeland. The Palestinians and the Arabs, the Muslim world, refers to what happened in 1948 as the Nakba, which literally translates to catastrophe. Imagine close to 1 million people getting expelled from their houses and their homes and their land. Not thousands of years ago, less than 100 years ago. We call ourselves civilized
Three
now?
principles which enable us Israelis to live so easily with this brutal reality. A, most of the Israelis, if not all of them, deeply believe that we are the chosen people. And if we are the chosen people, we have the right to do whatever we want. B, there were more brutal occupations in history. There were even longer occupations in history, even though the Israeli occupation gets to quite a nice record. But there was never in history an occupation in which the occupier presented himself as the victim. Not only the victim, the only victim around. This also enables any Israeli to live in peace because we are the victims. But the third set of values is the most dangerous one, and this is the systematic dehumanization of the Palestinians, which enable us Israelis to live in peace with everything. Because if they are not human beings like us, then there is not really a question of human rights.